The 24th of November, 1326, marked a grim day in the bustling marketplace of Hereford, England. The streets were abuzz with a diverse crowd, nobles in their finery, clergy in solemn robes, merchants hawking their wares, and peasants standing on tiptoe to catch a glance. All eyes were drawn to a wooden platform that loomed over the throng, a stage set for a brutal spectacle of justice. On that platform, guards escorted a man in his 40s, whose pallor and frailty revealed the toll of self-imposed hunger. His once opulent attire hung in tatters, signifying a fall from grace that would be etched into the annals of history. This man was no ordinary noble. He was Hugh Despenser, the younger, a figure who had basked in King Edward II's favour and was rumoured to have been his lover. His impending execution was not just a personal tragedy, but a chilling reminder of the consequences of unchecked ambition and the peril of making powerful enemies. As the crowd awaited the grisly event, whispers filled the air, speculations swirling about how Hugh Despenser had fallen from a position of influence to this terrifying end. To truly grasp the significance of this moment, one must delve into the intricate tapestry of power dynamics, ambition, lust, and betrayal that coloured England's political landscape in the early 14th century. Hugh Despenser was born around 1286 to Hugh Despenser the Elder and Isabel Beauchamp, who was the daughter of the Earl of Warwick. From the very beginning he was steeped in privilege, his family entrenched in a world of nobility and vast connections. His father was a steadfast ally of King Edward I, the progenitor of Edward II, which afforded the Despensers substantial wealth and influence. Young Hugh was groomed for greatness, learning the intricacies of serving the crown and nurturing the family's power. His fortunes shifted when Edward II took the throne in 1307, setting the stage for Hugh's gallant yet doomed quest for grandeur. The new king had quickly become well known for his preference for male favourites, a fact that stirred quite the controversy at court. His first close companion, Piers Gaveston, drew significant ire, not only for capturing the king's affections, but also for his brash demeanour and blatant disrespect towards the established nobility. The scandal reached new heights when Gaveston was brutally murdered by a group of rebelling barons in 1312. Leaving a palpable void in the king's inner circle. This gap was quickly seized by Hugh Despenser, who adeptly navigated the shifting political landscape to forge a close friendship with King Edward II. By 1316, Despenser had risen to the prominent role of Chamberlain, which granted him unprecedented access to the king. To further solidify his position, Hugh entered into a strategic marriage with Eleanor de Clare, the king's own niece, securing the affluent lordship of Glamorgan in Wales. As their friendship deepened, so too did Hugh's thirst for power and riches. He used his influence over Edward to manipulate the legal system, facilitating the expropriation of land from unsuspecting nobles and even vulnerable widows. One particularly shocking incident involved his own sister-in-law, whom he pressured into relinquishing valuable assets. His ambitions took a particularly daring turn during a brief exile from England amid a baronial rebellion in 1321. In a surprising move, he turned to piracy, attacking English merchant ships in a blatant disregard for the law and social order. When Edward II successfully regained control over the rebellious nobles, Hugh returned from exile with newfound strength and determination. From 1322 to 1326, the Despensers, father and son, were not mere players in the government. They effectively wielded power over it. Hugh the Younger became the gatekeeper to the king, manipulating royal finances and exercising control over extensive lands. The medieval historian Jean Froissart wrote that he was essentially the King of England in all but title. Adding an even more scandalous layer to this already tumultuous situation were persistent rumours surrounding the true nature of the relationship between Hugh Despenser and King Edward II. leaving the court abuzz with speculation and intrigue. Despite being married and a father to several children, rumours began to swirl within the court about Hugh's close ties with Edward. Chroniclers of the era hinted at accusations of sodomy, a term that indicated homosexual relations, which were not only deemed sinful by the Church, but also considered a severe violation of both societal norms and divine law. Queen Isabella, the wife of Edward II and a daughter of the French king, harboured a deep resentment towards Hugh Despenser. Her husband's blatant favoritism towards Hugh increasingly restricted her influence, her assets, and even her access to her own children, particularly as Despenser began to exert more control over royal matters. By 1324, Despenser had gone so far as to seize the Queen's lands and imprison members of her household, extending his overreach to the children of the royal couple, who were forcibly removed from Isabella's care and placed under the supervision of Hugh's wife. The Queen's fury bubbled beneath the surface, ultimately exploding when she was dispatched to France in 1325 to negotiate a peace treaty. It was there that she encountered Roger Mortimer, a powerful baron who had managed to escape the Tower of London after being imprisoned for opposing the Despensers. Mortimer and Isabella forged a bond that blossomed into a romantic relationship, ultimately aligning their ambitions for a bold coup against Edward II and his favoured advisor. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer returned to England, leading a small army of mercenaries into the country. What took both Edward and the Despensers by surprise was how quickly the English nobility rallied behind the invaders. Years of mistreatment, extortion, and humiliation at the hands of the kings. Favourites had sown deep seeds of resentment throughout the land. As support for Edward II and the Despensers began to crumble, the king and his allies were forced to flee to Western England, taking with them a significant portion of the royal treasury. The stage was set for a dramatic shift in power, one that would change the course of English history. The escape, however, was destined for disaster. The inseparable father and son duo of the Despenser family found themselves torn apart. Hugh the Elder was apprehended in Bristol and faced a swift and brutal execution. On October 27, 1326, he was hanged while still clad in his armour, a grim testament to his defiance. After the hanging, he was beheaded, and his remains were quartered, tossed to the dogs. A dreadful conclusion for a man who had devoted decades of service to the English crown. Meanwhile, the desperate flight of Edward II and Hugh the Younger continued through the rugged landscape of Wales. With nearly all of their supporters abandoning them, their situation grew dire. They were ultimately captured near Neath, and in mid-November, Edward found himself a prisoner forced to abdicate in favour of his 14-year-old son, the future Edward III. As for Hugh Despenser, his fate was to be even more harrowing. Realizing that mercy would not be extended to him, he attempted to end his life by refusing food, but his plan was unsuccessful. On November 24th, he was dragged before a tribunal dominated by his sworn enemies, Roger Mortimer, Queen Isabella, and the Lancastrian barons who had suffered greatly at his hands. The trial itself was a mere formality, a brutal display dressed up as justice. Hugh faced a long list of charges: treason, theft, corruption, and manipulation of the king, among others. To cloak their personal vendetta in an air of legitimacy, the tribunal meticulously went through the legal motions. Yet the verdict was a foregone conclusion. Hugh was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to one of the most grotesque executions documented in English history. Subscribe now to join us on more journeys into the twisted, bizarre, and downright grotesque corners of the past. Unlike Hugh, you'll at least get to keep your head. On the morning of November 24th, Hugh Despenser was paraded to the bustling marketplace in Hereford, where a vast crowd had gathered, including his prosecutors, Mortimer, Isabella, and the triumphant barons. What transpired was a chilling spectacle of retribution and humiliation, carefully orchestrated for public viewing. Hugh was tethered to a tall ladder, ensuring every eye could witness his suffering. A crown made of nettles was placed upon his head, a cruel mockery of the royal crown he had once shared with Edward. The skin of his body bore biblical verses condemning arrogance and evil. Then the true torture began, as chronicler Jean Froissart would later recount, leading to a horrific climax that left an indelible mark on the annals of history. But death would not come swiftly for Hugh Despenser. What followed was not a simple execution, but a deliberate spectacle of cruelty, an event meant to terrify enemies of the new regime and provide public satisfaction for years of oppression under his influence. First, he was dragged from his prison cell into the open square, stripped of dignity before the assembled crowd. His once noble garments had been reduced to filthy rags, hanging from his thin, trembling frame. The executioners tied him to a wooden frame where his ordeal would begin, not with a swift beheading, but with something far worse. Before his eyes, a great fire was prepared, its smoke curling into the cold November air. Then, with brutal precision, the executioners opened his abdomen with a sharp blade. Slowly, methodically, they pulled out intestines, feeding them into the fire below while he was still alive. Despenser's agonized cries echoed through the square, horrible, unnatural sounds, somewhere between a roar and a shriek. It is said that the noise of his suffering delighted many in the crowd, who saw his agony as justice for the cruelty he had inflicted on others during his years in power. Finally, after prolonged torment, his lifeless body was hanged until dead. But even death offered no peace for Hugh Despenser. His corpse was taken down, his head severed from his shoulders, and his body was cut into 4 quarters. Each part was sent to a major city, grim trophies meant to display the complete destruction of his influence. His head was sent to London and fixed upon a high spike, a silent warning to all who dared to pursue tyranny and corruption. This brutality was not only revenge for his exploitation of the English people and nobility, it was a statement. The leaders of the rebellion, including Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer, wanted to show the entire realm that the old regime of greed, favoritism, and abuse of royal power had been cut away like a diseased limb. The burning of his entrails and the scattering of his remains were symbolic purifications, a message to all who might abuse power for personal gain. It was not just the destruction of a traitor, it was a ritual cleansing, a brutal performance, meant to wipe away the sins of a broken reign. Just 4 years after the tumultuous events surrounding his downfall, in December 1330, Hugh Despenser's widow, Eleanor de Clare, was granted permission to collect and inter his remains on their family property in Gloucestershire. Tragically, only a few remnants of Hugh were recovered. His severed head, a femur bone, and some fragmented pieces. This grim fate was a stark contrast to his former status as the second most powerful man in England. Edward II, whose reign was marred by controversy and crisis, met a similarly tragic end. Initially imprisoned by his nobles, he was assassinated in September 1327 at Berkeley Castle. The circumstances surrounding his death are shrouded in notoriety. The most enduring legend, though debated by modern historians, suggests that he was murdered via a red-hot poker inserted into his rectum. This gruesome method would leave no visible marks and has been interpreted as a deeply symbolic act, aligned with long-standing rumors about Edward's sexuality and his perceived moral failures. The macabre symbolism inherent in both deaths highlights a perverse sense of poetic justice that many contemporaries perceived. The reign of Edward II, along with the dramatic rise and fall of Hugh Despenser, represents one of the most tumultuous periods in medieval English history. For centuries, the narratives surrounding these figures were heavily influenced by societal norms, including homophobia and moral condemnation regarding their relationship. Edward was frequently portrayed as a weak king, overly influenced by personal passions, while Hugh was demonized as an unscrupulous manipulator who exploited the king's vulnerabilities to gain power. In contemporary analysis, historians have increasingly adopted a more nuanced perspective, while acknowledging that Hugh Despenser was undoubtedly a greedy and ruthless politician whose insatiable ambition alienated nearly every faction of the English nobility. They also recognize the complex interplay of personal and political motivations that characterized Edward II's reign. This reinvestigation of their legacy calls into question the historical narratives that have traditionally cast them in such starkly negative lights, inviting a deeper understanding of the societal dynamics at play during this chaotic era. Historians, both medieval and modern, have long debated the true nature of Hugh Despenser's relationship with Edward II, while some chroniclers eagerly repeated salacious claims about their intimacy. Later historians have noted that such accusations were often used as potent political weapons. Charges of moral corruption, especially those involving accusations of sexual misconduct, were routinely employed by enemies to justify rebellion and public execution. In the context of medieval England, to accuse someone of immoral behavior, particularly of undermining traditional gender or sexual norms, was to strip them of legitimacy and paint them as a threat not just to the king, but to the entire social order. Whatever the truth of the matter, one thing remains clear. The fall of Hugh Despenser represents one of the most extreme examples of how political rivalries in medieval England could become personal, violent, and theatrical. His mutilated and dismembered body served not merely as punishment, but as a message. It warned others of the dangers that awaited anyone who overreached their station, manipulated royal power, and dared to disrupt the fragile balance between monarchy, nobility, and public expectation. Despenser's fate illustrates more than just the downfall of a powerful man. It reflects how justice in medieval England was often performed, not simply delivered. Executions like his were carefully orchestrated events, blending law, revenge, and theatre. They were designed to satisfy the rage of the people, appease political factions, and send a clear message that the established order had been restored. Hugh's public torture and execution dramatized the notion that his crimes were not just political, but moral failures, an offense not only against the nobility, but against the kingdom's very fabric. His rise and fall are almost operatic in their extremes. From the relatively unremarkable son of a noble family, Hugh climbed to become the most powerful man in the land besides the king himself. His appetite for wealth, his manipulation of the courts, and his accumulation of enemies made his eventual fall both inevitable and extraordinarily brutal. In a matter of years, he went from royal favorite to a body scattered across the realm, pieces of which were displayed like trophies of the new regime's victory. And yet the ultimate irony of this bloody drama was that the very people who orchestrated his fall, Queen Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer, would themselves meet their own downfall soon after. Just 4 years later, in 1330, the young Edward III would seize control, executing Mortimer and sidelining his own mother, Isabella. Thus, the violence and betrayal that brought about Hugh Despenser's horrific death would continue to ripple through English politics, a brutal cycle of power gained, abused, and lost. The execution of Hugh Despenser was not the end of tyranny. It was merely the latest chapter in a kingdom defined by ambition, cruelty, and the ever-turning wheel of political fortune. Mortimer would meet a grim fate similar to that of Hugh Despenser, hanged as a traitor, though he escaped the gruesome additional tortures that accompanied some executions of the time. This chilling chapter of history reminds us how the wheel of medieval political fortune can pivot dramatically. Even after nearly 700 years, the story of Hugh Despenser continues to captivate and disturb audiences alike. In a recent survey, he was voted the greatest British villain of the 14th century and even garnered votes as one of the most notorious Britons in history. Despenser's life has been dramatized across various mediums, including plays, historical novels, and television series, where he is frequently represented as the archetypal corrupt and manipulative courtier. Despenser's brutal execution in 1326 is particularly harrowing. As the favorite of King Edward II, he was subjected to a series of tortures before his death that exemplified the extreme cruelty prevalent in the medieval judicial system. He was not only hanged, but also castrated, and his body was displayed publicly, serving as a stark warning against the consequences of political favor and betrayal. Today, the legacy of Hugh Despenser serves as a testament to the enduring complexities of power dynamics, political favoritism, and the exploitation of privileged position issues that remain alarmingly relevant in contemporary society. The story of the king's favorite, whose life was marked by a tumultuous mix of ambition, greed, and tragic downfall, reflects a timeless narrative that resonates across the ages. Despenser's rise to power was facilitated by his close relationship with King Edward II during a period characterized by political strife and instability. He wielded significant influence over the king, leading to his accumulation of wealth and lands. However, this same proximity to power sowed the seeds of his undoing as rival factions sought to exploit his vulnerabilities. The chilling details surrounding Despenser's execution serve as a reminder of the brutal methods employed to maintain control and order during medieval times. The violent end met by Despenser and others like him showcases the often arbitrary nature of justice in an age defined by absolute monarchies and shifting loyalties. Despenser's story invites us to critically examine the interplay of power, sexuality, and justice, reflecting issues that persist in modern governance and society. In this way, the narrative of Hugh Despenser transcends its historical context, echoing the complexities of human ambition and the consequences that come with pursuing power at any cost. If you enjoyed this dive into the brutal world of medieval politics, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.